Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 233rd edition of our weekly Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll notice that we have a guest who has been a guest here before. So I'm delighted to say we didn't put her off first time, but Dr. Ronda Zelezny-Green is with us today. So hello, Rhonda.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Stan. Good
Hi.
morning.
Yeah, and we always ask because, well, whenever I see you online, I'm wondering what part of the world are you in? Where are you today?
So today I am in Spain, just outside of Alicante, so very near to you
Oh,
all.
It's a hard life, isn't it, Stan? Eh?
yeah.
What's the weather like in Salford, Stan?
Just wet.
Wet.
Just very,
Ooh.
very
And it's
wet.
actually taken, the weather's got a little bit colder because we've had quite a nice warm summer, but it's sort of been a bit of a shock to the system because the autumn has certainly arrived. But thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining us again. Do you want to just give a little introduction to yourself so that, i.e., how do we know each other, but also more broadly, the sort of stuff that you're involved in?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, Frank and Stan. So my name is, as you already mentioned, is Rhonda. And Frank and I know each other because we both sit on the board of InnovateHer, which is a fantastic UK social enterprise is getting the tech sector ready for girls and girls ready for the tech sector. I myself, I am a recovering academic, as we alluded to in the pre-chat. I do a lot of things, but I think today the hat that I'll wear is that I'm an independent researcher working with Population Council for their Girls Center. So doing a lot of research focusing on girls, and I'll soon be publishing a blog post series that will look at the intersection of girls and their mental health as it relates to social media use. So I'm
Wow.
looking at that from the perspective of low and middle income countries in particular.
So how long have you been doing that for, Rhonda?
So Pop Council or Population Council, they brought me on earlier this year in May of this year, and it's a 2 year, very part-time engagement working with researchers from around the world.
Wow, wow. Yeah, I mean, we've known each other for, I think I joined the board around 2020, 2019,
Yeah, so
something like that.
5 years.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to say, those who, anybody out there who hasn't connected with Innovate Her yet, the website basically tells you all that you need to know. But the key thing is that it's free for schools.
Yes.
That's the key thing. So we're very lucky to have business sponsors who support the Innovate Her programs. And I mean, we were talking before, but the Innovate Her is run on a shoestring, but it's amazing what it achieves. So,
And
um,
I want to plug their cybersecurity course. It's excellent for school age children. I mean, I think even primary children would benefit, but definitely secondary school age children throughout the UK and actually the world. I'm very deeply impressed as an expert in that area. What they've done with that course is so incredible.
yeah. So Innovate Her, just search for it on any search engine, and it'll pop up. Very bright, very lively, but it works, and we need to do more, don't we? We definitely need to do
Absolutely.
more. Okay, well, January 2024 was the last time, well, the first time you're on, Rhonda, and in that time, it's amazing. We've got a new government in. We've got we've now got this week today the American president on a state visit to the UK. And we were talking before about a convicted felon being allowed in, whereas some people who are desperately in need of support and care being pilloried in the press for trying to get on a boat, even though they've done nothing wrong. But it's a strange world that we live in. But anyway, let's move away
Mhm.
from that and
Mhm.
concentrate on what's caught Stan's eye this week.
Interesting.
Right, what's caught my eyes, like everybody else, I think, I ploughed through the Ofsted toolkit, looking at mainly how much work inspectors are going to have to do in a short time to complete that and provide evidence for everything. And I'm fairly sure it's impossible to do with any real depth of evidence. I think that this will be done on the fly in a lot of cases. We'll see three things, that'll do as evidence, we'll get on with it. But a colleague of mine has been going through it in far more detail and lifting out the questions that inspectors have to ask or have to assure themselves of. And it's turning out like a very good piece of self-evaluation as a document so that schools can ask themselves the question, which reminds me of a document I think I made in, what would it be, about maybe 2000, maybe 2001, called Asking Ourselves the Question, where I turned the whole of the framework round into a set of questions. The idea of it being then that it would be a 5 minute start of a staff meeting, that you take an area like attendance and you ask the questions and you say, well, how are we doing as a group in monitoring attendance, managing attendance? Not a great in-depth data led, just a chat. And a few schools that I know used it found they had a lot of things that they discovered about themselves and answered in that 10-minute chat. I'll give you an example. One school's talking about behaviour and saying that behaviour had declined, and the staff were sort of agreeing that children were noisy in the morning, they weren't coming to assembly carefully, they were noisy at break times. And then a teacher who'd been there a long time said, well, we no longer stand on the corridors like we used to do. And everybody kind of said, oh, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We don't actually take them to assembly like we used to. And they resolved there and then they would go back to that method, and that made a big change to the children's behaviour in school. So it was a 10-minute conversation. Now, I like those kind of things. I like it when staff contribute to a discussion. Um, but I am also wary that if we produce this document that I think I will produce, the danger is it's only Ofsted. It's not the whole school. And you have to be able to think wider and perhaps produce your own self-evaluation document for aspects that Ofsted don't bother looking at.
Yeah, yeah, Ron, this is very topical for me. Probably the last 6 months or so, I've been pursuing this. I agree fully because with that element of it, and that you're suggesting that that self-evaluation and what you're producing from the toolkit is a helpful position to take for a school leader. You know, if you're reviewing how effective you are. And the point you made about it not being, this is not being done for Ofsted, but actually Ofsted is driving those. In effect, the toolkit is a grade descriptor. And so, in a way, if it's used to sort of say, well, here are some areas that you might not have considered that you need to think about, I think that's helpful. What isn't helpful is then saying to schools, well, you've done that. You've now got to grade yourself against the criteria that we have established about what effectiveness looks like. That's what I have a struggle with. So as soon as you flip it into a grade, and the only reason we're doing the grades is because the government and Ofsted want a grade, because that allows them for intervention to take place. I think you then start getting into a very murky world about, you know, who is controlling the self-evaluation of the school.
I think the reality is, Frank, I'm not naive that every school that does any self-evaluation against the toolkit will do it against
Yeah,
a grade
yeah,
because they'll want to be able to say we are above this line.
yeah. And I think what will happen then, as you know, Stan, there won't be the openness
No.
about school improvement. It will be about getting the grade. You
Mm.
know, what's interesting, Rhonda, you know, you're not as deeply involved in this as we are, but actually, I actually trying to think if digital education is even referenced in the toolkit. I don't think it is.
No, I don't think it is.
You know, I mean, we were talking before, didn't we, about, you know, we seem to be producing an education that's based on a Victorian principles. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, what's your take on it then? I mean, the place of digital education.
Well, I was going to add to what Stan was saying because it seems like, and I don't know if my assumption is correct, but like the idea of taking the students to the assembly maybe it was kind of a time demand for the teacher, right? So like they only have so much time during the school day. So they're like, all right, maybe we can save time by not
Mm.
doing this part of it, like walking the students to assembly, but in saving not in trying to save that time, in part, we're also causing another problem because the unruly behavior is I assume causing disturbances for other classes. And so I focus on time there because you said it was like what 10 minutes, something like this. And the thing that I'm thinking is a great connection is that with the advent of technology from the perspective not of students using it, but for teachers using it, is the idea that it can potentially save them time, freeing them up to
Mm.
do other things like this, right? The more interpersonal interactions. And so I was thinking about it from that perspective and wondering, are most schools in the UK really making an advantage or taking advantage of what we're now seeing with the dawn of generative AI to do things to make their lives a bit easier and freeing up more time. So that was my connection that I immediately started thinking when you shared that finding, Stan.
See, but Rhonda's revealing her deep interest in AI
My
research
true
here, isn't she? Yeah,
intentions.
like we've been involved in the last, I don't know how many years, Stan, since we've been doing this blog. We've been, these video casts. We've been pillaring the inspectorate, for one thing or another. But actually, you do get into a little bit of a rabbit hole. So it's interesting having Rhonda here, isn't it? Sort of
Yeah.
because it made me think then about, well, I mean, there is this sense of a collective act of worship, which I think is probably there is a requirement, a statutory requirement that there is a collective act of worship. And sometimes in some, particularly in primary schools, that is viewed as we get everybody into the hall and we then, we have some announcements, some theme, and there's a prayer and perhaps a song. I don't know. But actually, digital technology would allow that. We wouldn't even need to move out of the classroom. It could well be done by the school leader sitting in their office, just actually doing it through through the screens. But actually, so in a way it
Do
does.
feel 1984 coming on there, Frank.
I mean, that might link a little to Trump's state visit as well, 1984. But
I can see the screens in every classroom with the logo on, and then the principal's head appearing. Today's announcement.
I remember though, it was I think it was the 80s. And I remember working with, I was a class teacher at the time, and we had a radio system in each of the classrooms. So there was a speaker in each of the classrooms. It was one of those schools that was built in the sort of late 60s, so this was all sort of, it was open plan, semi-open plan. So it was sort of trying to break this idea that the classrooms have got to have four walls and whatever. And it was to be honest, it was a very, very creative place. There's some very, very, very high standards in that school. So I remember thought, oh, well, we'll create a radio program. And so we created for a half term 6 weekly radio programs, which were broadcast around the school. Now that was in the 80s, the early 80s, so, and it sort of feels as though, how many years ago is that? That's
40.
50 odd years, isn't it? But we haven't really, we were trying to do that then, but it seems, we do seem to be stuck though. It's interesting you should raise it, Stan, the walking down the corridor.
It's
there's even simple things like that, right? Like it's not like a major, you would never think of it as something major and crucial to education, but it is, right? But you got to also have the time to do that. And I think, based on what you said, Stan, about Ofsted amplifying the number of questions that inspectors have to do, I'm imagining that means that it's amplified work for teachers as well. Where are people going to get the extra time to do these things?
well,
Stan,
you're right. What happens is the interpersonal stuff disappears. When I was ahead, we looked at this as an issue with not bad behavior. We didn't have bad behavior, but mild disruption. Let's say children not settled.
but it fluctuates, doesn't it?
Yeah, but
Even
we
in the best schools.
created a time. I insisted that everybody spent 10 minutes in the morning, getting to know what the children were up to, what was influencing them. Unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, it was a time before now, can I say, we called it grooming time,
Oh,
which
God.
is now as a new.
I think that needs a rebrand, Stan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by that we meant, ruffling somebody's hair and saying, how's your dog? Your
Yes,
dog
yes.
was ill, and having those conversations before the school day started. So you've got a better relationship, the children are more relaxed, etc. And it worked really well, but teachers felt under pressure to get on with real stuff. And I
Oh,
had to insist this 10 minutes was a definite part of the day because it was making a bigger difference than, say, doing some
Yeah.
other activity just to make it look like it was real teaching.
It was your form time. That's probably, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
reform time.
Real steady on, Stan. That's a good word to use on this video cast. Um, Rhonda, what's caught your eye this week?
so this week, in making a UK connection to the global, yesterday I attended a rights AI webinar. So looking at children's rights from the global south or in low and middle income countries related to their use of generative AI. And this was excellent research that was led by the London School of Economics and Dr. Sonia Livingston, who is someone I look up to quite a bit. And basically, it's taking a look at the perspectives of teens aged 13 to 17 in India, Brazil, Thailand, and Kenya in terms of how they're using generative AI. And so, what some of the findings were is that we're seeing a lot of the youth kind of teaching their parents how to use generative AI. The youth are, in my opinion, they were thinking very complexly about some of the challenges that we see with generative AI. So, for example, the researcher Jennifer Caberry shared a story about how they asked generative AI to create a picture of an African Superman and it generated someone white. And they were like, oh, so generative AI is
Wow.
racist. And yeah, so like seeing that happen and seeing how that youth interpreted it, and there were just so many stories about this. And so, when we talk about generative AI, and that's why I linked it to what you were saying, Stan, I think, it does have a really, really great promise of helping to save time, but then in the time savings that it is producing, is it making sure that we're having, equitable, intersectional outputs? And so I'm curious if, because the UK education system is not my specialty, but do you two know how big has generative AI been so far in terms of its use in UK schools? I haven't really read anything, and I don't think it has been, but I could be wrong.
I do think I've seen evidence in a couple of schools where curriculum design, lesson plans,
Mhm.
um, that kind of stuff is being done through AI, and that's I've been told by teachers that's saving them an enormous amount of time.
Okay.
Um, but I don't know then what they do with that time.
Maybe take a mental health break.
You
I
do.
don't know. Given all the demands, that might come with Ofsted inspections. And so I'm very interested in this from a research perspective because you're right. Like, I think it can save time. But then what does that enable people to be able to do? Because as we know, teachers in the profession of teaching is one of the most poorly compensated yet one of the most high demand professions that you could ever have. And for the listeners and viewers at home, I myself, I'm a former English as an additional language teacher myself, so I'm very sensitive to the demands of what this requires. And I think generative AI could be a revolution, but if at the same time of time savings, Ofsted inspections are going to require more time, maybe, any time savings are actually eliminated because there's more to do.
And I think, as you've said with your example before in Africa, I think there's a level yet of mistrust in what AI produces. I did something about a week ago where I was looking for an infographic, produced the infographic from a set of documents that I needed, and thought, great, I can just send that off. Until I looked more carefully, and there were spelling errors in it.
Hmm.
And you just think, the last thing I expected from something generated by AI was spelling errors.
Was
Well,
it an image, Stan?
It was an image. It'd been done into an image from text, and so it was just misused text, but it was like the word highest had about five G's in it, all one after another, and I almost sent it off without checking because it had been generated by AI, and I didn't think it needed a check, but clearly it did.
Well, you know what? And this is one of the weird things. Some of the generative AI tools are better at like eliminating those errors. But one of the things they noticed from the beginning is when people would generate images, you would have misspelled words despite the inputs not being misspellings. You would have extra fingers despite knowing that humans only have most humans only have five fingers, right? And so I think you're exactly right. If you're someone like me and you study AI and its usage in education, then you kind of have already known, like, okay, generative AI can do X, Y, Z, but here are some asterisks that you need to be aware of. Teachers, whether they're in the UK or India or Kenya, they may not know that because they won't have time to really go through all of that. So I'm wondering if it's a matter of, all right, as we, kind of roll out Gen AI or as teachers are adapting it, what are some of those best practices to be aware of? Because it can save you time, but it also might be more trouble than it's worth in
hmm,
some
yeah.
instances.
Yeah, I think when I've used it, it's not necessarily saved time, but it's
Hmm.
helped organize. If I've been writing a report and word things in a more professional way, but then I definitely have to go through it because it'll have Americanized words that I wouldn't normally use.
I
And
Uh,
think,
and 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 it speaks to the data training, right? Like if it's the majority content they're taking from the US because they're US
yeah.
companies, you're absolutely right. This is an issue.
But isn't, I mean, we had a guest on, I've had a guest on a couple of times who's an author, an English secondary school English teacher. And she always sort of said, the reason why I'm so passionate about teaching English literature, English language, is because it allows young people to see when they're being tricked or
Mm.
things are being misrepresented or there's an element of bias. And unless you have that sort of, unless you have that sort of level of understanding, and that some of that will come through an ability to be able to read and interpret text, really it's going to be an uphill struggle for some young people who could be vulnerable to misinterpretation or misrepresentation through materials that are presented to them in this way. So it's interesting that one of the Scandinavian countries has put back onto the curriculum sort of media studies in a sense, but actually, how to promote AI, how to promote the internet as a positive tool, but also to highlight the dangers involved in it and being upfront with that. Whereas in England, particularly, I don't know what it's like in Wales and in Scotland, Northern Ireland, but there is, we've had guests here who have told us they produce material that allows teachers to address some of the delicate issues that they find difficult to tackle. And some of those are around the internet, whether that's around pornography or whatever. Teachers don't, some teachers don't want to go down that road. So people are stepping into that void. Whereas that other country, the Scandinavian countries, put that at the forefront as one of the major concerns. So it'd be interesting. We have a curriculum review coming through from the current government shortly. It will be very interesting to see how much of a shift there is to try and address some of these sort of issues, which are not Victorian issues, are they?
No,
No,
The
and
real
I,
again,
and
world
I
issues.
Frank, it's not only the English. I'm just thinking now of an image that's been going on social media, um, linked to this protest over the weekend,
We had a
showing
far right protest, Rhonda, in
Mm.
London.
all these flags and this great parade, and people have been commenting on, this is great to see and everything. It's actually got the Arc de Triomphe at the end of the parade. So, so, so it clearly wasn't in England, and every Union Jack is being held in the same position in this hundreds of thousands of people all holding their Union Jack dead straight. So it's clearly an AI generated, but what I'm saying is it doesn't matter because people don't look that detailed into it. They see it, read what it says, and it says this is the parade in London, and they go, "Wow, look at all those people in,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and move
Well,
on."
and I wonder if that like, all right, we don't get into the details. Maybe is that how we're going to consume in education, right? Because another
That's the
thing that
worry.
we're seeing is even students using it, right? Like I feel glad that I completed my PhD before the advent of generative AI because like I actually had to write it, right? But I think what a lot of teachers are grappling with. So my one of my best friends, whenever I'm in the UK, which is very often, her daughter is now in I think it's sixth form, and I was having a discussion with her about generative AI, and she's like, "Well, it doesn't really help because if you use that and you come to the test and you don't know your material, it's not really going to help you pass." So I'm wondering if we'll also see any kind of outcomes related to the grades that or the marks that students achieve as a result of the increasing Gen AI usage and how that affects teachers, right? Because you then also have to adapt the way you teach, the way you prepare students to confront the reality of
Yes.
increased Gen
But
AI
it
usage.
always highlights for me, though, Rhonda, that the teacher is the best placed person to know how much a child knows.
Yeah.
It always feels to me the sense of an exam, the
Mhm.
sense of even using coursework. For me, the thing is around how much interaction is there? What is the student offering in the classroom discussion, in those direct inputs? That for me tells me a lot about how much progress, how much knowledge that child has gained from these lessons. And in a way, I think AI is going to be, it may help with the marking of exams, but actually I'm still not convinced that the exams are going to be the way forward in terms of what we're looking for in future requirements for young people in terms of what they do at work or what they do at play. I'm just not sure that that's the way forward.
I think we've got to look for a slide as well from at the moment being skeptical, let's say, about a lesson plan produced by
Yeah.
AI and teachers checking that it does to a point where we've used it so many times, we stop the checking bit and just trust it.
Mm. Oh, we can't do that. I think
And
we
that's what will happen, isn't
I
it?
think the African superhero
It's a really good
story
example.
is a stunning. I mean, I will take that away, Rhonda. That's going to come back in a number of my talks, I have to say.
Oh, I mean, and
Wow.
it's crazy. And Stan, well, Frank and Stan, I'll share the link to that report where that finding came from, and it was just like, wow. And so I think, a lot of the focus, if you will, on Gen AI has been like, oh, it's gonna get so smart that it's just going to take over. And Stan, your examples, we can't tell that you're in the UK using it and wanting UK English and perspectives. It can't even tell that, and we're worried about it taking over the world. I have six fingers. It can't spell highest correctly. Like these are basic things. So, in that respect, I think, it's such an important tool and an aid. And you're right, Stan. Maybe it doesn't necessarily save time, but it helps to give you a somewhat steady foundation from
Yeah,
which to
I agree
build.
with that. I
Yeah.
think the other thing it will help is conspiracy theories, because now every time something that's real somebody decides it's AI generated all.
You're right. Like it's kind of the thing where I'm like a grammar freak. And so I used M dashes all the time. But now they're like, oh, if you use M dashes, that's Gen AI. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it's just good grammar.
I'm always suspicious now of emails that start with I trust you are well or I hope I find you well. Because
Because watch out what's coming.
well, no, that's
You're
just
not going to feel so well at the end of this.
Oh,
an AI generated letter starts with that almost every time.
Oh, I see.
So the
well,
first
I'm
thing I have to do is
curious.
take that
Do
out.
we think Ofsted is using Gen AI in its operations at all? And if so, how and where? That I would be curious about because I know that where we have Gen AI being used to assess or make decisions that involve humans, it can be wildly wrong,
Wrong.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that
We,
happening?
well, we've been approached, haven't we, Stan? We're going to be meeting somebody at a hotel near Stan's who approached us because they'd seen one of our chats, and they've developed an AI tool for gathering evidence and evaluating that evidence. So,
Oh.
if they're thinking that could be a product that schools might use, it's not it's not a far step. It's not a big step, is it? For
Hmm.
Ofsted to say, oh well, send that to us. We'll evaluate it. We'll see whether we need to come in or not. You know what I mean? That sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. But actually, at the end of the day, we have. I'll move on to what's caught my eye because we've in that framework stand. Somebody's worked out there are somewhere over 300 requirements for
Yeah.
schools, and
300.
the inspectors have a day and a half to evaluate those 300 requirements.
I
So
think I calculated 175 actual statements that they've got to consider and produce
Oh,
evidence.
wow.
yeah. So it's paper thin. The evidence is paper thin, So, and just to reiterate that, I got an email this morning from a colleague who had attended the Ofsted webinar yesterday, explaining how this new inspection arrangement would work. I hope you don't mind me just reading it, and then we'll close the chat.
Yeah.
I was dismayed at the Ofsted webinar yesterday. It felt very much like the last inspection process, but in disguise, changing the names but not the content, just tweaks. I asked a few inspectors I know earlier this year, and the response to what is the difference between a deep dive and a learning walk, the answer from one was shrug shoulders. So much for the transparency in the webinar and the operating guide. Perhaps a requirement for becoming an inspector or one of Her Majesty's inspectors from now on should be the proven ability to wear roller skates to carry out non-specific but wide-ranging learning skates around the corridors of schools, especially the larger ones, or perhaps an environment-friendly golf cart that would allow us to get round the school a little bit quicker. But essentially, it's the same old hash, recycled but then raising the bar. As with the increased monitoring of anything found to be in there's a section called needs attention. They're categorizing schools. The old requires improvement grade at least gave schools some time to address the failing areas. Perhaps magical qualities are also needed to be in Ofsted because they're adding an extra inspector to each of the inspection, plus more inspectors needed for monitoring. Where are these inspectors coming from, especially with inspectors so unhappy with the new supposed reform framework? Will they find them by pulling them out of a big top hat? So I think that's a general sort of sense of distrust and a sense of it's a slight hoodwink. It's around what change is happening. And Rhonda, these changes are being introduced because a head teacher in Kent committed suicide
I
after one
remember
of these
this news.
inspections. And what is most disturbing is to see the sense of it's a tweak. And the coroner's report directly said that Ofsted was responsible for that head teacher taking their life. And any tweaking of the previous arrangements is simply not good enough in my eyes. So,
No.
and
Needs to
actually
be
what's
large
happening
scale
now, I've
transformation.
felt that, and what's happening now is these webinars, which Ofsted are producing, will probably produce the same sort of reaction to the one that I've got there. That is not, I'm not, that's not the only one I've got, but it was one that summed it up best for me.
Can I finish with a positive, Frank?
Yes.
Oh, that's we just it's just a bit of humanization. You know, my grandson started nursery in a school for the first time, and at the end of the first,
I've known this, Stan, because you've looked very, very tired over the last 2 or 3 weeks while you've had to look after him for part of the
oh,
week.
we still got him half days. But on the first day, Mum came out of school and was given a little bag which had in it a poem about your child first starting school. That which finished with, you might shed a tear, but you need to go home and have a cup of tea and a biscuit. And in the bag was a tea bag, a tissue, and biscuits. I just thought there was some humanization there.
Yeah, but this makes me realize, and I see this, that I go to a number of schools and I look around, and the disaster that people talk about is simply not my picture of what is happening in schools. The vast majority of them are, but I have to say, particularly primary schools, are very, very caring, inclusive places. They understand, how to get the best out of the children and to support the families and the community. Yeah. Well, thank you for being positive there, Stan. We needed
Yeah,
it.
well, thank you, Mrs. Black, for thinking it through.
And I think maybe some kind of analysis, Gen AI could help Ofsted think through how they could have real change because we don't want to lose head teachers like that one. That story, yeah, I knew about it when it happened and it was just devastating. We don't want that anymore.
No,
So I agree
no.
with you, Frank.
We
The
are.
thing is, we don't need it. It's not that we just don't want it. We don't need. I think I looked up last week. I think there's something like 90 schools in the country that are in difficulty, and yet we've got what 6,000? Is it more than
Well, we've
6,000?
got 26,000. Well, it varies, but it's 25,000 or so
25,000 schools,
in
90 of
England.
which are in trouble. So why are we inspecting to that
I
degree
agree.
the rest of the country?
I agree.
Imagine if all that money that was in that went into those 90 schools
To help them.
to help them get
And they
better.
gave some of it to InnovateHer to really kickstart the AI teaching and learning in our schools. That would make a much bigger difference, I think.
I wholeheartedly agree, Frank.
Yeah, yeah.
Good
So
value for money.
that's another week gone by. So Rhonda, I'm
Thanks so
hoping
much,
you'll
Ram.
accept an invitation for 2026.
I'll be there. You know I love you too.
I don't think we've ever had anybody say they love us, Stan.
No,
You can come again, Rhonda.
yeah, I do.
When I was preparing this morning, I was like, no, I got to be back home so I can have my Frankenstein chat. So no, it's I was so happy to get the invitation. Thank you for letting me come
No,
here and bring an international perspective. But as you can see, everything is very much interlinked.
yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant.
brilliant.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you, Stan. Thank you, Rhonda. And all being well,
No.
we'll see you all next week. And actually, next week we've got a former head teacher who's going to be joining as primary school head teacher. So looking forward to that. So anyway, see you all next week and hit more.
Great.
Yeah,
Take
you'll be.
care.
Yeah, thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right.